Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this brown bag session. We are very happy to have Professor Jadrian Wooten, all the way from New York, to come and give us a talk on his new book called Parks and Recreation and Economics. To end. I don't know why you didn't use a comma between parks and recreation, but there must be some reason for that. Okay, so very briefly, Professor Jadrian Wooten is currently teaching at the Pennsylvania State University, which he's been there for, I think, is it 6 years or so? 7 years. After having graduated from the Washington State University, teaches basically applied microeconomics, focusing on labor. Very interestingly, does work also on sports economics. So, which is a very exciting area, especially if you're working with the data. He also develops other teaching tools as well. We look forward to learning a lot from his talk. And in the future, hopefully we can also engage more in terms of academic exchange with Professor Jadrian. So without wasting more time, I am going to allow Professor Jadrian to give us about 30-40 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session after that. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So I have been told that I'm required to say Sawadee Krab as my opening, and thank you for inviting me to this. So I can't explain the title of the book. I'm happy to explain why it's phrased that way. I did ask them to change it, but there is a reason that it's set that way. So my name is Jadrian. I'm a teaching specialist at Penn State University. So like Young-Yoon said, I've been there for 7 years now, always been a teacher. And so I wanted to make sure that this talk was broader than just about this book. I'm very happy. I'm very excited for this to come out. It was a work in progress last year. This is definitely a pandemic project. So the pandemic has helped me write this book because I didn't get to travel to conferences, so I got to do this instead. So I'm very excited. It comes out this summer, and I'm very excited to talk about it. But I figured I would talk about teaching first, because I'm a teaching specialist, and I thought, if you haven't watched Parks and Recreation, this might be a strange book to look at. But I figured it was worth taking the time to talk about teaching with media and a little bit about where this book came from and where the idea came from. So I figured I would split my talk into two different sections. That way I will focus on the book, but I always hate to I don't want this to be a book sell. I want to be able to offer some real tangible advice for teaching economics and changing maybe how you teach economics. I am part of this project has gotten so big that it's like my little baby at this point. I started the Economics Media Library back in 2014 when I started at Penn State. When I started this website, so you can, the link's on the screen if you want to go to it. One of the really nice things about Zoom presentations is you guys can move away from my slides and go look at stuff while I talk. And so I'm more than happy to tell you to go to this site. It's perfectly okay. I started this in 2014. It is essentially a collection of video clips that you can use to teach economics to your students. There are currently, I used to know the number for sure, it's like 550 clips. I did not collect them all. Like, I did not watch all these TV shows. This really started back when I first started teaching. My goal was to have a place that I could have video clips that I showed in class and then give them to my students so they could watch it again. I was displaying TV clips and TV show clips and movie clips, and then my students would say, I want to watch them again. And they were on a file. I didn't want to, I couldn't email it to them. They were too big. So I started a website. And this website has really just grown more than I could have ever imagined. Thousands of people visit it every day. I can see where students are coming from. So I can see the different universities, and I can see the university emails and university links. And so it's a really great resource. If you're on the fence about teaching with media, this is a great place to start. If you do teach with media, this is an even better place to go. So there's lots of really cool resources on there, and I'll share some international ones as well. But one of the things that I think I can even use as a selling point is some of the clips on the show are even in Thai. So it's not completely in English. Most of them do have English subtitles. Well, any of the international clips have English subtitles. Most of them have subtitles, and that's really important for sharing media. But I figured I would give you a taste of teaching with media for those of you who have never done it before or never thought about that different shows or different commercials are really beneficial for teaching. So I have one of the Thai clips for you. So I've set it up to share my audio, and hopefully the video will not be super choppy. Many of you, I'm going to go on a limb and say that many of you have seen this, many more than my students, given that this is a Thai commercial. But if you haven't seen it, I think this is a really great opportunity that this may have been a commercial that you didn't even know was on. And then if you're teaching macroeconomics, maybe this is a great clip for you. So I'm going to turn off my video, and then that way you can fully focus on this video.
ขอต้อนรับสู่รายการ
อ้อมโลกผ่านดาวเสาร์จนค้นพบโลกใหม่
เด็กคนนี้มีแววอัจฉริยะผู้ที่จะคิดค้นโลก
ป้าซื้อลูกชิ้นลูกหนึ่งได้ไหมครับ อ๋อ ไม่ได้ จะอิ่มเหรอ
ค่าเงินลดลงทุกวันเก็บอย่างเดียวไม่พอ
So I don't know how many of you have seen that clip before. It's for my students, zero. Like zero students have seen that clip, unless every now and then we have maybe 2 or 3 Thai students. Maybe they've seen it, but the bulk of them, my students, have definitely not seen it. And I think one of the things that's really great about a clip like that, when I show it, that is like the most moving, heartfelt commercial that we don't have those kind of commercials. And so like you can like see the pain in these students as they watch this. But one of the things I really like is that is I don't think we often get, this is gonna be kind of a weird way to say this, we don't often have feelings in class. We teach, we go, our students don't typically leave angry. Well, I mean, sometimes they leave angry. They don't leave sad, and they don't leave like connected to the material, but there's a connection there. And so one of the things that's really nice is that they're able to connect with the media. You know, if I just stood up and talked about depreciation and inflation and how savings is important, but if you wait too long, you might not have the money, their eyes are going to gloss over. They're not going to be as excited about that. And so I think, at least if I'm going to sell teaching with media, I hope that I can show you some different clips that work. So this is really where the Parks and Rec book started and where it came from. It was this economics media library. I was using media to teach, and I started teaching with other media. And then I'm very thankful some people found out that I was doing it, and they offered and asked me to write a book. So if you're interested in teaching with media, you don't have to develop everything yourself. And so I wanted to show you a couple different websites and a couple different academic papers that you can use that are basically prepared for you. So maybe it's, seeing a clip is kind of easy for us. Most of us have PhDs in this. So it's easy for us to see the economics. Sometimes it's hard to come up with the questions. So if you're interested in using media in a Principles of Microeconomics course, this is a paper me and a co-author just published, and it actually just came out yesterday. This is for a Principles of Micro course. It lists a bunch of clips that are all available online. It's all on that website. All of them are free. They all have subtitles. They're all relatively short. So some of them are commercials. Some of them are scenes from a movie. Some of them your students have never heard of and never seen. And that's perfectly okay. And I actually think that that's one of the really nice things about teaching with media is you don't have to know what it's about. My students don't speak Thai. They know what this clip's about. They know what the story's about. And so maybe The Simpsons, I think that's probably the most universal one on there. Walmart is a big enough one. T-Mobile, I think that has Ariana Grande, so that has a pop singer in it. But there's a lot of resources out there, and there's a lot of really good resources that show you exactly what to do. So with this particular paper, it gives you a clip, it tells you the topic, and then it gives you questions that you can ask. And so some of the questions might be calculate the elasticity for this, for Nutella in this particular one. And so there's really good resources out there. If you're worried about the English component, I know that that's always a concern. There are international resources. And I didn't realize how, I think, Young, you kind of mentioned it offhand in your introduction, and I didn't realize it whenever you were saying it. I have a very standard biography that says, I work on teaching resources and that's what I do. And I think I'm far enough along in my career that I'm actually surprised at how many things I've done. If I had given this talk like 3 years ago, that would have been like, my goal was to be doing teaching resources. But now as I'm putting this together, I'm like, man, I do a lot of this stuff. And I didn't realize how much was out there. So if you would like more international stuff, don't worry, we have it for you. So these are 2 working papers that are available online. They are under review. Fingers crossed, we get them published soon. But if you're interested in teaching, so I'm a microeconomist, that's why these are all micro-based. If you're interested in teaching microeconomics using more international media instead of English or American-based media, we have a paper that basically goes through the exact same setup, but it uses clips from, there is a clip from Thailand in there. It's the train market clip. So it's on YouTube of the train that goes through the market, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, the Mekong market, I think. And so we talk about markets and how markets work and sharing spaces, but then there's scenes from China and Japan and Spain and Portugal. And so we have lots of different clips from that site. And then a new paper that this one is the closest one to being published, which maybe and actually, yeah, it'll be very popular, I think, for your students, is using K-pop in the classroom. So this one looks at 3 K-pop songs. One is, I should know these, BTS. It's obviously BTS is one of them. Blackpink, so there's a little Thai connection in there. Blackpink is one of the songs. And then EXO is the other one. So we tried to pick 3 really big K-pop groups. So there's only 3 in that one, but they talk about externalities, economic growth, and decision-making. And so for us, and a lot of the people that I work with, a lot of using media in the classroom, the goal is not to water it down. And I think that is always one of the really big concerns, is that people are like, oh, media, if you're using media in the classroom, you're just having fun, you're not really teaching. I think one of the things that's really nice, and I think you saw in that commercial, is you can teach with this material. One of the things that I really like about it is it's a professional story that somebody else has developed. And so instead of making up names of people for your problem sets or for your exams, you can use the names of the people from the shows. And so you kind of already have a backstory with a lot of these. So these are two international ones. There are definitely, I would say, well, K-pop obviously is going to be very big, but there are some Asian clips in the other one as well. If you're looking for more US media, obviously like American media is going to be the ones that most of us are doing. There are websites that are already available online that already have lots of clips and lots of examples. Some of them your students maybe will be familiar with, some of them maybe not. And a lot of it just depends on how much American culture they're consuming. So some of them will definitely know Breaking Bad, but then some of them won't. Some of them may know the spin-offs of Shark Tank, but not, I think this Shark Tank is just the American ones. But there's a lot of websites that are being developed and there's a lot of resources that are being developed. And I think one of the things that's really, really neat about this is that this material can only grow. I became a student as an undergrad at a I think a really cool time. I started my undergrad in 2005. So YouTube had not been created. YouTube was created, I think, in 2006, if I remember correctly on the date of that. So I started college where my professors would show a DVD or a VHS of what they wanted to show. So they had a really cool clip, but they had to like fire up the television to do it. And now I've gotten to see like the complete opposite. I've gotten to kind of switch and actually look at, here's resources that are available that you can stream with the click of a button. And I think really nicely that we're seeing through Zoom conferences, you can do them remotely. So you don't have to be in front of the classroom. You can show media during a presentation. So there's lots of really good stuff out there. One of the really nice things is if you just search the topic and economics, you will probably find it. I think that's one of the really nice things about economics is that it's all over the world, all over, right? We have it from K-pop, we have it in Europe, we have it in South America. There's lots of really good resources everywhere. And so this is kind of my backstory of what I've been doing the past 7 years. And this is really where the Parks and Rec book really came about. I was involved in a couple of these websites, but I really liked making teaching resources. I really like teaching economics. I think it's the best discipline in the world, but at the same time, I spent many years of my life doing it. So I hope that I think it's the best thing in the world. And so what I started to realize was that the more I kind of dug into this, the more I realized I could help people outside of my own students. So I absolutely loved helping my students find an appreciation for economics. I always hated when they would come into economics and kind of not be super excited about it. Some of the other majors are like way more exciting, like finance is really fascinating to them. Engineering is super popular. I always felt like we had to sell economics, and the other people, they had it easy. They had people running to them. So my goal was really make economics exciting, make it engaging, show them that it can be fun. So one of those other websites was actually based on Parks and Rec. And so that's where this kind of book really started. I have a friend who's at the University of North Carolina, and we had met at a conference and we started talking about Parks and Rec. It had just ended when her and I had started talking. And then we said, like, let's do Parks and Rec. This is a great TV show for what's out there. So what we did, and what a lot of these websites do, is they go through every single episode and they try to find little snippets and little clips that you can use to teach economics. So kind of like the Thai commercial earlier. We find a clip and we say, here's the economics behind it. So we have a website for that. Technically, these are not connected because like the direction is different. So in this case, we took Parks and Rec and we chopped it up and we found economics. And so this is where this came out. Kalina was not in a great place to write a book. And so she gave me full creative control to turn this project into a book. So eventually a book did come about. I like to say that it's in the exact opposite of the website. So the website is, here's Parks and Rec. Here are all the different clips that come out of it. I went the other direction. So I said, look, here's a Principles of Economics course. can I use this TV show to explain concepts? So this book actually looks very similar to a textbook. So I'll show you the table of contents to give you an idea of what's in there. But each chapter is actually presented just like a Principles of Economics course. The goal is economics first, and then it uses references from the show, character references, scene references, and those are the examples. And so one of the things that I really like about this book is you don't need any prior knowledge of the show whatsoever to understand the economics, because you're reading it for the economics, not for the Parks and Rec part of it. So where this title came from, so I promised I would explain the title. This is actually a series of books done by a publisher who is focused on pop culture and economics. So it's part of the, I should actually look up how to say this. It's either Rutledge or Routledge. I need to know how to say this publisher if they're the ones publishing the book. But what they did was maybe 5 years ago, started a series of books. So they have a book on Broadway shows, Seinfeld, war movies, superheroes, just a bunch of different pop culture areas. And one of the problems is that when they started the series, they were determined that the title of the book would be the pop culture and economics. So every book is phrased the same way. So it's superheroes and economics, Seinfeld and economics, Broadway shows and economics. And I tried to explain to them how weird it is that the name of my show is Parks and Recreation, and that that's not going to look good as Parks and Recreation and Economics. But part of, I think this is that professional branding. They're the marketers, and so they're very keen on everything has to look the same. But thankfully, they are also very good about separating out that and economics. And so I'm going to try to also do a very good job of like splitting the title of that to help a little bit. But it is part of a series. That's where these came about. The book has maybe 100 pages in it. I think it's 114 pages, but the goal is kind of a light textbook. So not a really big man-Q textbook that's 300 pages, something that's a little bit more digestible. So it does look just like a principles text. So I have the table of contents to give you an idea of what's in there. So the first third of the book is principles. So it's principles, comparative advantage, demand and supply, economic efficiency, government intervention. And then in chapter 6, it starts with microeconomic topics. So productions, market structures, labor markets, externalities, and game theory. And then the very kind of, I would say the back end of it is macro-based. So we have a section on money, economic growth, inequality, and public choice. And so the goal of the book was really somebody who has never taken an economics course. Maybe it's an 18-year-old fresh out of school who's going to college, or maybe it's somebody who just never took an economics course, but they want to learn some foundational material. So this is actually, at least the first 10 chapters are based off of my course. So I went through my slides, my notes, and basically tried to write a book based off of mine. I don't teach principles of macroeconomics. So the money and economic growth and inequality, I worked with a friend who does teach principles of macro to make sure that I'm covering the things that he talks about in that book. But again, the focus is economics first and foremost. So some of you maybe have never seen Parks and Rec. And so to give you an idea of what the characters look like, if you've never seen the show, these are the main characters. And I guess knowing what they look like is not necessarily that important, but knowing kind of what role they play in the show, I think is really key. So I've highlighted 5 of them. It's actually the 5 that are on the left side of the screen. These are the 5 that are probably the biggest characters in the show. But one of the reasons that Parks and Rec makes such a really good show is essentially the 2 main characters are Leslie and Ron. So Leslie is the woman right in the front, the blonde. Ron is the man over her right shoulder with the mustache. Leslie is a very stereotypical big government bureaucrat. She thinks the government can fix everyone's problems if they just trust the government to do things. So she wants to build parks and playgrounds and help schools. And she is definitely a Keynesian. And that's what I really like to kind of throw those out there. She is a spend money and things will be good. Her counterpart is right over her shoulder. Ron is the exact opposite. Ron is a libertarian. He believes markets solve every problem. The government should not have any role in any decisions whatsoever. One of his famous quotes, I don't have it for you, and so this is where because I know that this is being streamed on YouTube, because I saw these before. If I played the show, since those are copyrighted, YouTube would take the video down. So I was very careful not to play a clip from the show because I didn't want your brown bag series to be taken down for copyright stuff. But one of his famous quotes is that he hates the park system and he wishes that the parks were run by corporations like Chuck E. Cheese, and they could just do a token system. You want to ride a swing, you have to put a token in it. And so he's very much market-based, while Leslie is very much government-based. So they play this kind of equity efficiency trade-off back and forth throughout the entire series. So they show up in the entire book of what role government plays. Tom is standing right next to Leslie, so he has the tie on. Tom is an entrepreneur. He starts the series very lazy, but towards the end, he becomes an entrepreneur and starts lots of businesses. So he is heavily focused in the labor section, the market structure section, thinking about what types of businesses people create, what are the market characteristics of those businesses, how do you need to understand costs in order to make sure that you're profitable. So he kind of pops up in that section. And then Andy and April are the two people on the far left. They play kind of a slacker, underachiever people. So they show up in the labor section. Andy is actually really annoying. So he shows up in the externality section. And so they each kind of have a different role in the show, but then they also help kind of explain economics really well also. So I do have some scenes to kind of show you at least a screenshot of the show, and then to show you essentially how great this show is for learning economics. So the very first show, the pilot episode, is about this hole that is in the ground. And so this is really where the story starts. A citizen comes to the local government and she says, this hole is incredibly annoying. It's right next to my house. Somebody had started building condos and then they stopped, and she hates it because there's an eyesore and she has to see it every day. That company went bankrupt and it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood and it's been there for years. And so the very first episode is actually about Leslie wanting to turn this pit into a park. And so the entire series is kind of part of it is her trying to turn this into a park. And in that opening series, she starts with, she's going to turn this into a park. She wants to have playgrounds and swimming pools and basketball courts. And she starts listing off all these things she wants the government to do to turn this into a park. And there's a big problem. And this is right. I think this is how most of us start our principles course. Is one of the big problems is you can see how big this pit is. There's not enough space for swimming pools and basketball courts and playgrounds. She has scarce resources. She works for the government. She has to get her budget approved. She can't just spend whatever amount of money she wants. So she has a limited amount of money that she can spend on improving this. And she has a limited amount of space that she can spend moving stuff around. And so the very first pilot episode is actually the very first chapter of the book. And it's the very first talk in my principles course, is thinking about how do we make decisions, whether we're an individual, whether we're a government trying to turn something into a park, whether we're a business trying to think about how much product we want to sell. We face scarcity and we face limitations. So this is the Sullivan Street Pit. That's the name of this particular part. But one of the things I really like is from the very first episode, it's economics in the very beginning. So this particular book actually uses every single clip inside of it, which I think is really nice. But the chapter is themed off of scarcity is something we should all be concerned about. And then it references the material inside the book. So even if you've never seen the show, it'll introduce you, it'll tell you about there's a pit, there's a park, just like I'm doing now, except there won't be pretty pictures, unfortunately. Other really great scenes and other great moments in the story is externalities pop up everywhere. I think that's true for all of our lives, but it pops up in the book as well. Pawnee has a major candy company. So Pawnee's the name of the city that the show is based in. They have a candy company that is not that great of a company. They pollute a lot. And so one of the scenes in the show is two of the main characters. So you can kind of see Leslie standing there. They love this sunset. It's a beautiful sunset. They go out there and enjoy it. And, even just from the little screenshot, it's a very beautiful sunset. The problem is that sunset is caused by pollution from the local candy company. And so they talk about how beautiful it is. And the actual scene, they talk about this sunset is beautiful, but is it worth the asthma? And so it's generating a positive externality in the sense that we get this very beautiful sunset to look at, but it's also generating a negative externality that people in the city are having trouble breathing. And so it's thinking about what is Pawnee's incentive, or what is the candy company's incentive in Pawnee? They want to make profit. It's not clear who owns the air. They think they're doing something really nice by creating jobs and creating this very beautiful sunset. And they're not taking into account the fact that they are harming other people in the process. So, if you need the clip's on the website, but the book talks about externalities, and it talks about this scene, and it summarizes the scene. That way, again, if you've never seen it, it'll make perfect sense as you're going through it. Then there's some other topics that are very, I would say, particular to economics that are, depending on the class that you teach or the topic that you want to look at, there are entire episodes about things that we talk about in our principles courses. So one of the episodes is called Soda Tax. In this particular one, Leslie becomes a city councilwoman. She starts to lead the local government, and she decides that these sodas are too big for people in their town to be consuming. And so you can kind of see, right, like one of those is incredibly large. That's the regular in their town. And so her decision is, we're going to start taxing it. And so she goes through the process of debating essentially a sin tax, thinking about, we want to reduce consumption. We don't want people to consume these items. So you might also be able to link it into the consumption externalities, and thinking about how does the government respond when there's some sort of externality at play. One of the things I really like about this particular episode is you can also think about it from the other side of the story. The Pawnee Restaurant Association does not want taxes on their soda. They don't want to be taxed. They don't want government intervention, and they threaten to lay off workers. And they say, if you tax us, we're going to lay off workers. So you have to decide, do you care more about the health of people and regulating their behavior, or we'll make a big announcement that you're responsible for the firings. And so there's some really cool episodes like that happen throughout the story and throughout the series. There's an episode that's called Women in Garbage that is entirely about discrimination. Again, Leslie is a city councilwoman later in the series, and she notices that almost all of the departments in the government are typically run by men. And so she calls a meeting of all the heads of the different departments of the local government to talk about gender equality, and then only men show up to the meeting on gender equality. There are no women at all who show up. And then she points out the sanitation department, and she says, trash collectors in this town have really good jobs, really good benefits, and you have no female trash collectors. And the sanitation department responds and says, we hire women, we hire them to be secretaries. And so she tries to get to this debate of like, you are doing occupational segregation. You are placing women in particular roles that are not as well paid. And the sanitation department makes statistical discrimination arguments. They say, look, women can't handle picking up the trash and moving things. We're not purposely discriminating. We just don't have enough people who qualify. And so the entire episode is actually them the two of them going through and being garbage collectors for the day to show that women can do exactly what they're doing. So there are some very nuanced, so I will say, I talk about discrimination in my principles class. I would say capital D, like big topic discrimination. I don't really get to talk about statistical discrimination, occupation. I don't get to talk about like all those little Becker models and stuff. There's some really good details that I would love to talk about in my principles course. I don't have the time, but the book, I have plenty of space, so I can talk about those things and reference things. And then finally, I know there's probably some macro people out there. I'm going to apologize now. I'm a micro person. I'll give you a macro one. The Pawnee Historic House is an episode that goes back 200 years. Leslie makes a challenge to the man that's on the left in the hat. She challenges him to live like it's the 1800s. So they want to live they're trying to win a bet. And so the entire episode, they dress like they're in the 1800s. They eat like they're in the 1800s. They get rid of their cell phones. They get rid of their laptops. And they try to they only make it a couple days, but they try to live like they're in the 1800s. The man in the hat, he believes that was the best time ever, and that Pawnee and America has not been as great since the 1800s. Leslie vehemently disagrees. But one of the things that's really great about this one is you can think about it in terms of economic growth. How far have we come in the past 200 years? None of us were there. Yeah, none of us were there. None of us know what it was like. We read stuff, but one of the things that's really nice in here is they talk about how they didn't have running water 200 years ago. I think they talk about cholera in this particular episode, and talk about how good thing cholera doesn't exist because we're not worried about the water. Even though they're in a historic house, the water is clean. They have running water. They have indoor toilets. They talk about how they used to have outdoor toilets. And so you can see that they talk about some of these economic growths beyond things that are just their clothing and their cell phones and things like that. So it's a really great opportunity to talk about how much growth has occurred, when I think a lot of our students don't really realize how far we've come in those 200 years. So lots of great resources, but the book is primarily focused on economics first, and then here's some examples from the show. With that said, if you ever want to teach with media, there's always really great examples kind of in reverse that we have it, and then you can kind of plug the economics in later. So I think I went right between 30 and 45 minutes. So I promise I can always talk. I can fill in the gaps. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, whether it's about the book or just teaching with media or anything in between. I'm happy to answer those questions.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. That was very different from what we normally have, but very, very interesting. Nice way for us to spend lunchtime, and I think not too bad for you at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, too. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right.
All right. Bye.